The medical bay's doors burst open as two security officers carried in a stretcher. On it lay a young alien girl, her crystalline skin darkening from its usual clear blue to an alarming deep purple. The sight made Dr. James Miller drop his coffee cup, ignoring the hot liquid splashing across his white medical boots. "What happened?" he asked, already moving towards the patient. The security officers, both tall reptilian beings, looked at each other nervously. "Found her near the refugee sector, doctor," one of them said. "She's one of the crystal people. None of the other medical centers would take her." James was already scanning the girl with his medical tablet. Her vital signs were weak and getting weaker. The dark purple spread across her crystalline form like ink in water. He had never treated one of her kind before, but that wasn't going to stop him from trying. "Get her into emergency room 3, he ordered, his voice firm and clear. The security officers hesitated. "Sir," the other doctors said. "I don't care what they said. This is my emergency room, and I have a patient who needs help." James started pushing the stretcher himself when the officers wouldn't move. After a moment, they helped him. The emergency room lit up as they entered. James activated all his scanning equipment, watching as holographic displays filled the air around him. The girl's body structure was fascinating. Silicon-based rather than carbon-based, with a crystalline matrix instead of cells. Her blood was a liquid crystal that carried energy instead of oxygen. "Someone find her family," he called out to the nurses hovering by the door. "And get me everything we have on crystalline biology." A commotion outside drew his attention. A tall crystal being, his form more angular than the girl's, was arguing with station security. "That's my daughter," the being shouted. "Let me through." James waved to security. "Let him in. I need information about her normal biological functions." The crystal being rushed in, his footsteps making soft chiming sounds on the floor. Up close, James could see that his structure was similar to quartz, but alive with flowing energy. "I am Guard Captain Tech," he said quickly. "Lyra is my daughter. The other medical centers, they all refused." "I'm Dr. James Miller," James replied, still working as he talked. "And I don't refuse patients. Tell me everything about your species' normal biological functions. What should her crystal matrix look like when healthy?" For the next hour, James worked nonstop, learning more about crystalline biology in minutes than most doctors learned in years. He discovered that Lyra's species stored life energy in their crystal matrix, and the darkening meant that energy was leaking out, similar to a human bleeding out. Other doctors began gathering outside the emergency room, watching with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. James heard their whispers. "The human is wasting his time. Their biology is too different. He'll just make it worse." James ignored them all. He had treated silicon-based bacteria during his research on Earth. While a sentient crystalline being was far more complex, the basic principles might be similar. He adapted his equipment, adjusting the frequencies of his medical scanners to better read Lyra's energy patterns. "Your daughter has suffered a severe energy shock," he explained to Tech. "Something disrupted her crystal matrix. I can try to stabilize it, but I'll need your help to understand if I'm doing it correctly." Tech nodded, his crystal form catching the light. The other doctors, they said it was impossible, that the risk was too high. James smiled as he prepared his equipment. "Captain, impossible just means nobody's done it yet. Now tell me, when her matrix is healthy, what frequency does it resonate at?" As they worked together, James noticed more crystal beings gathering outside, watching anxiously. He learned they were refugees, fleeing from a dying world where their crystal matrices had begun to fail. No other species had been willing to help them, fearing their different biology might somehow be dangerous. Looking at Lyra's darkening form, James felt a surge of determination. He might be the only human doctor on this station, but right now, he was also this girl's only hope, and he wasn't going to let fear of the unknown stop him from saving the life. "All right," he said, adjusting his medical instruments one final time. Let's show everyone what's possible when we work together. 3 hours into treating Lyra, Dr. James Miller's hands were shaking from too much coffee and too little rest. The young crystal girl's condition had stabilized, but just barely. Her purple discoloration hadn't spread further, but it wasn't retreating either. "Doctor," Captain Tech said quietly, his crystalline form dimmed with worry. "There's something you should know about how this happened." James looked up from his medical screens. "I'm listening." "This wasn't an accident." Tech's voice became harder, like diamonds scraping steel. "Some people on this station don't want us here. They attacked her with energy disruptors, weapons designed to shatter our kind." James felt his stomach tighten. He'd assumed it was some kind of accident or illness. "You're saying someone deliberately hurt a child?" "We're refugees," Tech explained, his crystal surface clouding with emotion. "Our home world is dying. Its core is cooling, and without its energy, our people are starting to fade. We've been searching for a new home, but—" He gestured at the doctors still watching from outside. "Most species see us as too different, too dangerous." A commotion at the medical bay's entrance interrupted them. Dr. Ross, the station's chief medical officer, stormed in with 2 security guards. He was a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 eyes, all of them currently narrowed in disapproval. "Dr. Miller," Ross said sharply, "you need to transfer this patient immediately. We're not equipped to handle crystalline beings. The risk to our other patients is non-existent." James cut in, standing between Ross and his patient. "I've been monitoring all energy readings. Her matrix is completely contained." "You can't know that," Ross insisted. "Their biology is too alien. One wrong move could release an energy burst that's exactly the kind of fear-mongering that left this girl without help in the first place," James said, his voice firm but tired. "Sir, with all due respect, I studied silicon-based life forms. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Ross stepped closer. "Because I've read your Earth credentials, Miller. You were a field medic before coming here. A trauma surgeon for disaster zones. Not exactly qualified for xenobiology." James smiled slightly. "Maybe that's exactly what qualifies me. In disaster zones, you don't get to choose your patients. You help everyone you can, however you can." He turned back to his medical screens, pointing to the data. "Look at these readings. Their crystal matrix isn't that different from silicon-based bacteria we've studied on Earth. The principles are similar, just on a larger, more complex scale. If we can understand that, we can help them." Ross wasn't convinced. "The board will hear about this, Miller. If anything goes wrong." "Then it's on me," James said. "I'll take full responsibility. But right now, I have a patient to save." After Ross left, Tech touched James's shoulder lightly. The crystal being's touch was cool but not cold. "Why are you helping us when no one else will?" James checked Lyra's vital signs again before answering. "Because someone has to start somewhere. Fear of the unknown. It's natural. But it's not an excuse to let someone suffer." He adjusted some settings on his equipment, watching as new data scrolled across his screens. "Besides, your people's biology is fascinating. The way you channel energy through your crystal matrix, the way you resonate with different frequencies. Understanding this could revolutionize medicine for all species." Tech's form brightened slightly, their equivalent of a smile. "You sound like Lyra. She's always been curious about other species' medicine, always asking questions about how others heal. Then let's make sure she gets the chance to keep asking those questions," James said, turning back to his work. He had an idea forming, something about using modified frequency generators to help stabilize Lyra's matrix. It was risky, untested, but possible. And right now, possible was all he needed. Looking at his unconscious patient, James made a silent promise. He would not only save her, but would find a way to help all her people. Someone had tried to shatter this girl because they feared what was different. He would show them that different didn't mean dangerous. It just meant there was something new to learn. James hadn't slept in 36 hours. His office was a mess of holographic displays, data tablets, and empty coffee cups. On every screen, different pieces of information scrolled past. Earth studies on silicon-based life, reports on crystal formation, and energy wave patterns from his scans of Lyra. "You need rest, Doctor," his medical assistant, Bot 7, hummed as it cleared away another coffee cup. "Not yet," James muttered, comparing two different scans. "There's something here, something we're missing." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking Lyra's room. The young crystal girl's color was still dark purple, but she was stable. Captain Tech stepped beside her, his own crystal form dimmed with exhaustion. James rubbed his eyes and looked back at his research. That's when he saw it, a pattern he'd missed before. He quickly pulled up his old research from Earth, studies he'd done on silicon-based bacteria found in deep-sea vents. Bot 7, display Lyra's energy wave pattern next to the bacterial resonance frequency. The patterns appeared side by side in the air. They weren't identical, but they were similar. Very similar. That's it. James straightened up so fast, he knocked over another coffee cup. The bacteria use resonance to repair their silicon structures. If Lyra's people evolved from similar life forms, he rushed to his equipment storage, pulling out an old frequency generator he brought from Earth. It was designed for treating silicon-based infections, but with some modifications. Bot 7, get me my tools, and call Captain Tech to my office. When Tech arrived, James could barely contain his excitement. "Captain, I need you to look at something." He pointed to the displayed patterns. "This is how silicon-based bacteria on Earth heal themselves. Does it look familiar?" Tech leaned closer, his crystal form brightening with interest. This is very similar to how our young ones grow their first matrix layers." "Exactly." James started pacing as he explained. "Your people's crystal matrix isn't just a structure. It's alive, growing, healing, just like these bacteria, but more complex. The energy disruptor didn't just damage Lyra's matrix, it disrupted her natural healing frequency." He held up the frequency generator. "This device helps silicon-based organisms restore their natural resonance. If I can modify it to match Lyra's normal frequency, you could help her heal herself." Tech finished, his form now glowing brightly. James nodded. "But I need to know exactly what frequency your people naturally resonate at. Can you help me with that?" For the next few hours, James and Tech worked together, the crystal being shared ancient knowledge about his people's healing practices, while James adapted his Earth medical technology to work with their biology. It was a perfect blend of ancient wisdom and modern science. Other doctors began dropping by, first out of curiosity, then with genuine interest. Even Dr. Ross came to observe, though he tried to hide his fascination. "The principle is simple," James explained as he worked. "Every living thing has its own natural frequency. Disrupt that frequency, and you disrupt life itself. But if you can restore the right frequency..." He made a final adjustment to his modified generator. The device hummed softly, emitting that gentle blue light. "You can restore life," he finished. "This is untested," Dr. Ross warned from the doorway. "Completely experimental. If it fails, then we'll learn from it and try something else," James said firmly. "But doing nothing isn't an option anymore." He looked at Tech. "It's your decision, Captain. I believe this will help Lyra, but there are risks. Her matrix could reject the frequency. Or..." "Do it," Tech said without hesitation. "My daughter is a fighter. She would want to try." James nodded and picked up his modified device. As he walked toward Lyra's room, he felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. This wasn't just about saving one girl anymore. If this worked, it could change how the entire station, maybe even the whole galaxy, viewed the crystal people. "All right," he said softly, approaching Lyra's bed. "Let's show them what happens when we work together instead of letting fear keep us apart." The modified frequency generator hummed in James's hands as he approached Lyra's bed. The young crystal girl lay still, her purple-darkened form a stark contrast to the white medical bed. A small crowd had gathered outside the room. Doctors, nurses, and several crystal beings, all watching in tense silence. Bot 7, record everything, James ordered. If this works, others will need to know how to do it. He placed the generator next to Lyra's bed and looked at his monitors. Her energy readings were stable but weak, like a flashlight running out of batteries. James took a deep breath and activated the device. A soft blue light filled the room. At first, nothing happened. Then, ever so slightly, Lyra's crystal form began to resonate with the generator's frequency. The dark purple areas vibrated, creating a gentle chiming sound. "That's it," Tech whispered, his own crystal form humming in response. "That's the growth frequency of our home world." James carefully adjusted the settings, increasing the power bit by bit. The chiming grew louder, and the purple areas began to pulse with light. But something wasn't quite right. The frequency wasn't spreading evenly through Lyra's matrix. "There's interference," James muttered, checking his readings. "The damaged areas are blocking the resonance." Dr. Ross stepped forward, all four of his eyes focused on the monitors. "The energy pattern. It's like a shattered window trying to reflect light." "That's it." James snapped his fingers. "We don't need one frequency. We need multiple frequencies. Like tuning a whole orchestra instead of just one instrument." He quickly reprogrammed the generator, making it emit several harmonizing frequencies at once. The room filled with a complex melody of chiming sounds. Lyra's crystal form began to glow brighter, the dark purple areas starting to clear from the edges inward. "It's working," Tech said, his voice full of hope. "The matrix is beginning to heal." But suddenly, alarms started blaring. Lyra's energy readings spiked dangerously high. "Her matrix is absorbing too much energy too quickly," James said, his fingers flying over the controls. "We need to slow it down or—" A burst of bright light filled the room. Everyone shielded their eyes. When they could see again, they found James kneeling beside the bed, one hand on the generator, the other pressed against Lyra's crystal form. His hand was glowing where it touched her. "Doctor, let go," Ross shouted. "The energy transfer could kill you." But James held on, gritting his teeth. "No, look at the readings. My body is grounding the excess energy, acting like a circuit breaker." And he was right. The dangerous energy spikes were leveling out. Lyra's matrix was stabilizing, the purple darkness retreating faster now. The harmony of frequencies filled the room with beautiful chiming music. "Impossible," one of the alien doctors whispered. "A carbon-based life form shouldn't be able to channel crystal energy like that." "Lot of impossible things happening today," James managed to say through clenched teeth. His hand was burning where it touched Lyra's crystal surface, but he didn't let go. Sometimes impossible just means nobody tried hard enough before. The process continued for several minutes. Gradually, the dark purple faded from Lyra's form, replaced by her natural clear blue color. The dangerous energy spikes subsided, and James finally let go, collapsing into a nearby chair. His hand was red and blistered, but he was smiling. "How did you know that would work?" Ross asked, checking James's injury. "I didn't," James admitted, "but I remembered something from my Earth studies. Silicon doesn't just conduct electricity, it can regulate it. I figured maybe crystal beings could do the same thing, just more so. They just needed help balancing the energy while they healed." He looked at his burned hand and chuckled. "Though next time, we should probably design a proper grounding system instead of using my body." Suddenly, a new sound filled the room, a gentle, clear chiming, like crystal wind chimes in a breeze. Everyone turned to look at Lyra. Her form was glowing with healthy blue light, and her crystal surface was making the beautiful sound. "She's laughing," Tech said, his own form bright with joy. "In her sleep, she's laughing." James sat in his office, studying the data from Lyra's treatment, while Bot 7 wrapped his burned hand in healing bandages. The breakthrough had worked, but they weren't out of danger yet. Lyra's crystal matrix was still fragile, like newly healed bone that could easily break again. Suddenly, the station's lights flickered. The medical equipment beeped in protest as power levels dropped. Warning, the station's computer announced. Minor power fluctuation in Medical Section 7. James jumped up, ignoring the pain in his hand. Bot 7, check the backup generators. He rushed to Lyra's room, where the frequency generator was still maintaining her healing resonance. The device's blue light wavered as the power fluctuated. Lyra's crystal form dimmed slightly, and the dark purple began creeping back at the edges. No, James muttered, checking the generator's readings. We can't lose power now. Her matrix isn't strong enough yet. Captain Tech burst into the room. Doctor, someone's tampering with the power grid. The same people who attacked Lyra. They're trying to stop the treatment. James looked around quickly, thinking. The backup generators would take too long to power up. The frequency generator needed constant power to maintain the healing resonance. If it failed now, all their progress would be lost, and Lyra's matrix might shatter completely. That's when he noticed Dr. Ross in the doorway, all four eyes wide with concern. The surgical bay, James said suddenly. It has its own power supply, completely separate from the main grid. We need to move her there. Moving her is dangerous, Ross warned. Her matrix is unstable. We don't have a choice. James started disconnecting monitors. Tech, I need you to help carry the frequency generator. It has to stay at exactly the same distance from her. Bot 7, keep the power flowing to it no matter what. The lights flickered again, more violently this time. They had to hurry. Moving Lyra was like carrying a soap bubble without popping it. Every step had to be perfectly coordinated. James and Ross guided the floating medical bed, while Tech carried the generator, matching his pace exactly to keep the healing frequency steady. They were halfway to the surgical bay when someone stepped out of a side corridor. It was one of the station's maintenance workers, holding some kind of tool that crackled with energy. The crystal freaks need to go, he snarled, raising the tool. They're a danger to us all. James stepped between him and Lyra. The only danger here is ignorance. Look around you. We're making medical history, finding ways to help people we never could before. And you want to stop that because you're afraid. The man hesitated, his tool still crackling. Dr. Ross used his 4 arms to carefully take the device from him. I'm placing you under medical arrest, Ross said firmly. Interfering with patient care is a serious offense on this station. They continued to the surgical bay, leaving the would-be saboteur with security. Inside, the equipment hummed with steady, reliable power. James quickly connected the frequency generator to the surgical bay's power supply, and the healing resonance stabilized. Her readings are improving again, Bot 7 reported. The purple tinge that had started to return was fading once more. James checked all the monitors, making sure everything was working properly. His burned hand throbbed, reminding him of the risks they'd taken. But when he looked at Lyra's steadily brightening crystal form, he knew it was worth it. You did well, Ross said quietly, watching the monitors. Not just the medical treatment, but handling that man. You didn't fight hate with hate. Fighting hate with hate is like fighting fire with fire, James replied, adjusting some settings. You'd just end up with a bigger fire. The only way to fight hate is with understanding. And maybe, he gestured at Lyra's improving condition. Maybe that's what we're really doing here. Not just healing one girl, but showing everyone that different doesn't mean dangerous. He looked around the surgical bay, at the mix of beings working together, human, crystal, alien, and robot, all focused on saving one life. Sometimes, he said with a tired smile, the best medicine isn't just for the body. It's for the mind, too. 3 days after the power grid incident, James stood in the doorway of Lyra's room, watching in amazement. The young crystal girl was sitting up in bed, her form glowing with healthy blue light. She was creating small patterns of light in the air with her fingertips, something Tech had explained was a common game among their children. "The readings are remarkable," Dr. Ross said, standing beside James. "Her matrix is actually stronger than before the injury. How is that possible?" James smiled, looking at his bandaged hand. "Sometimes broken things heal stronger at the mended places, but I think there's more to it than that." He walked into the room, and Lyra's crystal form chimed happily when she saw him. Over the past few days, she had begun to wake up for longer periods, and James had discovered she was intensely curious about everything. "Dr. Miller." Her voice sounded like wind through crystal caves. "Look what I can do now." She created a complex pattern of light that looked like a double helix. "That's DNA," James said, surprised. "Where did you learn about that?" "From your medical books," she replied. "Father has been reading them to me." "Is it true that your kind is made of tiny moving parts instead of crystal?" James sat down beside her bed. "Yes, we call them cells. Actually, I learned about how to help you by studying very simple life forms on Earth that are more like your people than mine." Lyra's form brightened with interest. "Really? Can you tell me more?" Before James could answer, a group of visitors entered the room. They were crystal beings like Lyra, but their forms were dimmer, showing signs of the same energy loss that was affecting their dying world. "Dr. Miller," one of them said, her voice chiming softly, "we heard about what you did for Lyra. We were wondering if you could help us too." James looked at their dimming crystal forms and the way they resonated at slightly wrong frequencies. His mind was already racing with possibilities. "The frequency generator," he muttered. "If we modified it further, created different harmonics for different types of crystal matrices." He turned to Dr. Ross. "We could help their entire species adapt to life away from their dying world." Ross nodded slowly, all four eyes blinking in thought. "The station board met this morning. After seeing Lyra's recovery, they've approved the creation of a new medical department, specifically for crystal being treatment. They'd want you to head it." James was stunned. "Me? But what about all that talk about me being unqualified?" "Sometimes," Ross said with an alien smile, "being qualified isn't about having the right papers. It's about having the right heart." He gestured at Lyra. "You did what all our qualified doctors couldn't, or wouldn't do. You helped someone just because they needed help." Lyra suddenly made an excited chiming sound. "Dr. Miller, could I help too? I want to learn how you fixed my matrix. I want to learn all about medicine, both crystal and carbon-based." James looked at Tech, who nodded proudly. "She hasn't stopped talking about becoming a doctor since she woke up," the captain said. "You've inspired her." Looking around the room, James saw hope in every face, crystal and non-crystal alike. The crystal refugees had a chance at a new life. The station's medical community had a chance to learn and grow. And a young girl had found her calling. "Well," James said, smiling at Lyra, "every doctor needs students to teach, and I have a feeling you'll be an excellent one." He turned to the group of crystal beings waiting for help. "Let's get started. The first thing we need to do is measure each of your natural resonance frequencies. Lyra, would you like to help me demonstrate?" Lyra's form glowed brightly as she showed the others how to connect with the monitoring equipment. As James watched her explain things in simple, clear terms, he realized something important. Sometimes the greatest medical breakthroughs weren't just about finding new treatments. They were about breaking down walls between species, about showing that compassion and curiosity could overcome fear and prejudice. And sometimes they were about a human doctor who simply refused to give up on a patient who needed help. 1 year after Lyra's treatment, the medical bay of Station 7 looked very different. The once empty West Wing now glowed with soft blue light from specialized crystal being treatment rooms. James stood in his office, looking through the window at the busy medical center he now ran. His hand, long-heeled, traced the frame of a new plaque on the wall. "Crystal Matrix Medical Center, where different paths lead to common healing." Dr. Miller, a familiar chiming voice called out. Lyra hurried into his office, her crystal form glowing brightly with excitement. She was taller now, her matrix structure more complex, showing signs of her transition from child to teenager. The new frequency treatments worked, she announced proudly. All 20 refugees from the outer colonies are showing matrix stabilization. Their resonance patterns are adapting to station energy levels. James smiled at his young apprentice. In the past year, Lyra had absorbed medical knowledge like a sponge soaks up water. She could now read both crystal and carbon-based medical data with ease. Excellent work, he said. How did you adjust the frequencies for the colony variants? I used your Earth bacteria studies as a base, she explained, creating a holographic diagram in the air with her crystal powers. Then I modified the harmonics based on each refugee's home crystal formation. The colonies had different base frequencies because of their different star types. Their discussion was interrupted by Dr. Ross entering the office, all 4 eyes bright with news. James, the Galactic Medical Council just approved our treatment protocols. Every major station in the galaxy will now have a crystal being medical department. And they'll all need trained staff. A deeper voice chimed. Captain Tech stepped in, his crystal form strong and bright. He now served as the head of station security, his experience helping bridge the gap between crystal and non-crystal residents. That's why we're here, Tech continued. The council wants to establish a training program. They want you and Lyra to help create it. James